As NFL teams continue to run their off-season practice sessions, we're hard at work with team and player research for providing top analysis to preview the 2018 season. As part of our research, we need to reach out to the best analysts in the industry, as we do on today's show, by going one-on-one with the football scientist K.C. Joyner, football insider at ESPN.com, on the OFN Meeting Room with Greg DePalma. All right, it's Friday, June 1st, 2018. I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning into the OFN Meeting Room as we prepare for the 2018 season with ESPN.com's K.C. Joyner. K.C., thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
All right, K.C., so it's been a while. I know you've had your website up, your business up since 2003, correct? That's is that the footballscientist.com?
Footballscientist.com has been up since I really officially started in 2004. I quit my job and cashed out our 401ks with my Mrs. Scientist's approval. She got on board with that, amazingly so. I started. I did that in 2003 and started the website in 2004.
Yeah, and I know that we have, it's been a while since we talked because I had just started my website, Prime Sports Network, a few years after that. We talked for a little while, and of course your business and your relationships have really taken off, again, working with ESPN now, and no longer doing college football though, right? That's going to stop this season. It's going to be just NFL?
I might still do some college football coverage, possibly for the magazine and such, and maybe some articles online. But it's primarily now fantasy football in the NFL. Yeah.
All right, and so that's a relationship that has been going on for how long now with ESPN?
Been working for them since 2005 when Dr. Z wrote I wrote my book Scientific Football 2005 and sent it out to a bunch of sports writers and editors, and Dr. Z saw it and he liked it and wrote an article about it. And after he wrote an article about it, ESPN got in contact with me shortly afterwards, and I've been doing stuff for them ever since.
I love how that happens, huh? So anyway, we know how successful analytics can be for teams. The Astros won a World Series with it. Vegas Golden Knights are doing it in hockey. So tell me how you became a pioneer in the analytic football revolution.
I started probably back. I have to just trace back to 1984 when I've got one of Bill James's baseball abstracts, and loved it so much. I thought someday I'd like to do something about this for football. And fast forward to 2004, and I started writing Scientific Football 2005. Doing research from the 2004 season, and I just found that after I did my research, there were things that, like taking it even from fantasy football perspective or even standard football analysis, you can look at things like targets. If you go back to 2004, occasionally targets have been tracked before that. There have been some periodicals that had them, but generally speaking, people didn't look at them. And if you could look at from any perspective, from a fantasy football perspective or from a standard football perspective, you started looking at prospects and saying, well, this person got 125 targets, 150 targets, and he scored this many points, and this person got 100 targets, got this many points. You could start doing comparisons in a way that you couldn't do if you didn't use that metric. And so that's where we were back then, and since then, things have been added, and we can get a lot deeper into the analysis. But back then, that was kind of the dark days of analytics, because there just really wasn't a lot being done out there.
All right, but where did this idea come in your head? Like, what were you doing with your life before that said, hey, this is what I want to do?
I was actually doing a variety of other jobs, and I just knew I wanted to be a football writer. And I knew if I wanted to write about football, I was going to have to put in time to research it, to find something to say. Because if you just say the same thing everybody else is saying,
sure,
nobody's going to read it. So
gotta have a niche.
Yep, you gotta have a niche. So I took the year off and just studied tape. I was recording all the games back then too, and that's the thing is I've got a DirecTV set up in my house and a bunch of DirecTV recorders and things. Actually, it's been a different setup over the years, but back then I used to have it direct to go into VCRs and record all the games. And people, I got to be so recording games that after the Dr. Z article and things, they even had one team contact me a couple of times and say, "Hey, we missed our feed on the NFL game." They're trying to get like the audio feed to hear what the quarterbacks are calling if they're snaps and cadence. So like, can you send us this game? Because that's how it was back then. You
Yeah.
didn't have NFL Game Pass.
That's
You couldn't
right.
just go online and watch the games. You had to record them and things, and so being able to record them and break down all the games, so that was another advantage that I was able to get. So.
All right. Now, one of the books you wrote titled Blindsided, Why the Left Tackle is Overrated, and by the way, you can purchase the book on Amazon, was very well received when it was published 10 years ago because it was analysis ahead of its time. So what, if there was a smoking gun in your research, like the aha moment when you said to yourself, you know what, I've put in the time, I put in the research, but this moment, was there like a moment where you said, you know what? I think all this hard work is going to pay off because I think I've got something here.
In Scientific Football 2006, which is the follow-up to the book that Dr. Z wrote about, I started. One of the things Dr. Z had said when we talked via email back then too. Still keep in touch with his wife to this day. We try and be as close to the family as possible because of what he did for me.
Sure.
But he said, you need to write about the running game because Scientific Football 2005 was all passing games. So I said, okay, I'm going to do running game. So I started grading a bunch of different things. Then I graded individual offensive linemen, and I found that there's so much. That's why that book talks about the left tackle being overrated, because I started doing that analysis, and I found that if you looked at offensive line grades, that if a team had any weakness in the offensive line, the defense would attack it. It didn't matter if the weakness was at center, guard, tackle, whatever it was. It could be right tackle. If you had a weakness there, that was going to be a problem. So really, you had to have an airtight offensive line, and the idea that Bill Walsh pitched in The Blind Side, that the left tackle is so valuable. I mean, that showed me that wasn't the case. And you go back and look at Bill Walsh. He won his first Super Bowl with a backup left tackle with a guy who I think he was like a third string left tackle. Dan Audick, I believe, is his name. And then Bubba Parrish was his left tackle for his second Super Bowl win. And Bubba Parrish was the guy who was famous for having ate his way out of the league. He had a lot of talent, but he also, as I heard the stories, loved to eat a lot of fried chicken. And he ballooned to 340 pounds and ate his way out of the league. So Bill Walsh had a weak left tackle and still won 2 of his Super Bowls with a weak left tackle. So I'm like, well, Bill, you think left tackle is so valuable.
Yep.
You got by without a great one.
That's right. Yeah, it is something. Matter of fact, you've got right now. Do you have like a new offensive line grading system or report that you're putting out? You're working on some advanced metrics.
Yeah, doing offensive line grades. I started to do it last year, and I'm applying it a lot to fantasy football. It applies to overall too. I used it to help make my straight-up picks for NFL games, and according to NFL Pick Watch, I finished first among ESPN analysts for the second straight year and was second nationally. And what I did was I took a number of advanced metrics, both in the running games, advanced metrics that a lot of cases that I'm putting together myself through my tape analysis. So I got run blocking metrics, pass blocking metrics, and I have a metric also called stability and consistency, which is a way to look at how stable the offensive line is from personnel perspective and how consistent their metrics are. Because I want a team that has good metrics across the board. Because if you're great in one thing and bad in another, it's kind of like that. When we talk about the offensive line, if you got one weakness somewhere, then teams can be able to exploit that. So
got it.
It grades everybody in those three senses, puts weights on those grades, and then I come up with rankings and we convert them to letter grades from there. So, for example, Atlanta for this coming season, for my projections for the 2018 season, Atlanta is the best offensive line in the NFL because they're one of the few teams that gets an A in every category.
Interesting. Okay. And what do you mean, like an A in every category? Is that broken down though across the board, not individual players, right?
Yeah, again, because I found that you want to have an airtight unit, and I thought I do some analysis on players, but I really concentrate on the group as a whole. Because and that's why I want to know, though, is the group stable because, again, what I found from research is that if an offensive line is continually changing players, it doesn't matter what their talent level is. They have to have time to gel. You hear about that all the time, and it shows up in tape and it shows up in the metrics that if a team is constantly changing its players, they're just not going to be able to gel. You have one team that has talented players, but they keep moving around. They're probably not going to perform as well, at least past experience in metrics and tape analysis.
Okay.
They're not going to perform as well as a team that maybe doesn't have as much talent, but doesn't get injuries and can play together for the whole season.
Now, what about, because I find it interesting, like, for instance, the Jets, talent-wise, not very good. Haven't made a lot of moves to bolster their line during the offseason so far, but they did bring in Rick Dennison. and he's going to bring in a zone blocking scheme, which they haven't had. How much could that? Because I've always looked at like zone blocking schemes as ways where you could get by with not having the top talent on the offensive line. A lot of these guys that are zone blocking guys could be 5th rounders, 6th rounders, undrafted free agents. I mean, I've seen it work many times over with that type of coaching change. Why is that? Why do you know why, and how and how specifically does that factor into when you whether it's a grade or whether you how you analyze the position?
That's one thing I'll be adding this season is I'm going to be looking at I've got to factor it in. I know how I'm going to factor it in. I just got to go in and do it. When it comes to offensive lines and coaching changes could be a major factor.
Yes.
Because take Tennessee. Tennessee a couple of years ago, they had, according to my grades, they had the worst run blocking. I've got a metric called good blocking rate. I measure so often I call it an offensive blocking wall, actually. It's not just the line because tight ends, fullbacks, wide receivers, they all block too in certain situations.
Sure.
So I looked at offensive blocking walls, and then it was 2 seasons ago, Tennessee had the worst offensive line or offensive blocking wall in the NFL. And change coaches, get a new offensive line coach. It's because, again, it's mostly offensive line. Get a new offensive line coach. They finished second in that good blocking rate metric the next year. So, I mean, you can get that kind of a turnaround if you get the right kind of coaching, and it's just certain coaches. Because look at New England. They had Scarnecchia for years. Then they changed away from him, and their offensive line was nowhere near as good. That's why they lost to Denver in that conference championship game. Their offensive line couldn't block worth a darn. And now Scarnecchia is back for another season, and I've got New England, despite the fact they've got some stability and consistency issues, I still have them ranked as the 5th best offensive line going into 2018.
Yeah, everybody talks about offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, head coaches, and they leave out other coaching positions like the offensive line and so forth, and we all know how important that is. I think a team that is definitely going to have to and look, I applaud them. Maybe it was a little bit late, but Seattle had to make changes. And I guess they figured, well, whatever we're doing personnel-wise, because, look, they have a good – Schneider's a good GM, Carroll's a good coach, so they had to be – and I know they got egos, but they're probably saying, well, we like the guys, but it's not working with the coaching staff we have right now, so now they've changed coordinators, and maybe more importantly, Mike Solari is now on board, and he's going to change to the power scheme, to more of a power scheme. So same thing. I think Seattle is going to be a very interesting team to watch with their running game this year, not just because of Rashad Penny, but maybe more importantly because of Solari.
I think their offensive line is going to improve, and that change is going to be, I think, a significant change. I won't project them to do what Tennessee did that one year, but Cable's the sort of guy. It's funny. Teams will say that offensive line is one position that you can coach up, and they're right. You can do it, but you have to recognize the limitations of how much you can coach up. You have to say, okay, well, coaching us up, you can have the Tennessee situation, but Tennessee had talented offensive linemen, so they were underperforming before, and now you just got them maybe to overperform, but that's like an extreme example. But if you don't have the talent up front and you don't invest in the talent up front, it doesn't matter how good your coaching is. But Tom Cable's the sort of guy who, as I've heard, that he tends to think he can overcome situations. It's great to be that confident, but really they should have recognized that even if we think Cable's a good offensive line coach, and there are people who think both ways on his offensive coaching capabilities, but even if you think he's that good, don't leave him hanging that far out to dry, because New England, even with their offensive line, I mentioned with Scarnecchia and things, they didn't just say, Dante, come in here and be a miracle worker. They said, we're going to invest some in the offensive line and give you some help and things. And I think Seattle, they've done both that this offseason. So we don't know if our coaching was as good as we hoped, and now we're going to add some people too. So I think they're going to go from being abysmal to being maybe mediocre, but that'll be
that's okay
for them. Yeah,
that's all they need to be is mediocre. What about how the offensive line has changed since you wrote the book 10 years ago? How has it changed dramatically, whether it's the line game itself, the coaching, the way that the schemes are now? Because it seems like, and thank goodness, we're getting back to running the football in the NFL.
Yeah, it has been, because one of the things I had to do is there was a time when you looked at offensive lines and you might just say you gave relatively equal grades to run and pass blocking. You can't do that now. You have to, as it stands today, we're getting more towards the running game, and I like that too.
Yes.
I think it makes for a more entertaining game, and I think it's better for coaches too, because there are a lot of times where coaches tend to say we're going to go ahead and use all our creativity in the passing game, not realizing that you can do a lot of creative things with the offensive line and your running game if you can apply your coaching accordingly. Like Mike Heimerdinger, the late great former offensive line coach for the Titans, he did some really creative things with his offensive lines, and it paid off. So I think right now, though, as it stands league-wide, I think I've had to turn my formulas more towards offensive line being more valuable, or pass blocking being more valuable than run blocking. Just by factor 10%, I'll probably do 60-40 pass blocking and run blocking, just because that's really where the league is right now. And if we switch back more to running, I'll probably switch it back over. But at the moment, I feel like that's from a couple of studies I did that tends to be it tends to work out better if you're projecting forward.
Yeah, I mean, offensive lines are always the hardest for the casual fan to understand who's doing well, who's not. So if you're really not putting in the time, effort, research, all that in order to analyze and grade these guys, you just don't know. You got to rely on the experts, guys like you. So, like, but what happens when you see and hear about guys that are struggling, like, say, Donovan Smith with Tampa Bay or Matt Khalil, who seems like he's been struggling since his first year?
Yes.
And you just say to yourself, why are these teams constantly giving these guys chances and giving them decent contracts? I mean, Smith, okay, well, I guess because of where he was drafted, and we're going to give him another year. He's got another year left on his contract. But it just, as a fan's perspective, it's just annoying. It seems like there are guys out there on the offensive line that you don't notice, that you just got to rely on the coaches and then the analysts. And the analysts are telling you one thing, but yet the coaches are doing another. So how do you explain that when you yourself see the way, whether it's a unit or particular players, how they're playing, and you don't think they're playing very well, that, again, that may be getting chances time in and time again?
I remember talking to Matt Williamson, who was a former NFL scout who worked for ESPN for many years, and he's doing some independent stuff now. Matt told me years ago, we were talking about defensive line prospects for college, and I said something along the lines of, trying to just, I think I was saying something along the lines of, I think that, defensive line prospects are important, but you say, and he corrected me. He's like, no, he said, you don't understand how important they are, because he said there are only so many guys out there who coaches can get who are like 6'5" and 330 pounds. I mean, you cannot coach that kind of size. You just, he said there's only so many. And if you get one of them, if you can recruit one of them for your team, you're definitely going to be so much better, because even if that guy doesn't play up to his talent level, but he plays at 70% of his talent level, if you've got some other team trying to get by with a 6'4", 285-pound guy in return, usually the 330-pound guy is going to be that much more impactful. He knew that from having worked in the league and having done that kind of scouting and things. And it's just what it is that you have certain offensive linemen that if you've got a certain amount of size and strength, I think part of it's politics, and the politics of the draft and all that, and who you picked, and okay, we need to protect this guy to help out the person in our organization and things. But I think a part of it also is I've got this big guy who's really good, and I could put somebody else in there, but they think that it might be like Bill Walsh said, you can draft all those smaller guys who play well. And he said all that means, you get a smaller guy who hustles well. He said that's great, but all that means he's going to chase somebody over the goal line.
Sure. Yeah, there's 32 teams, 32 general managers, 32 head coaches, and they all think that they can figure out a way to make a specific player work for them.
Yep.
At least one of them for each team. Talk about your guide now. It comes out, you're trying to get it out early July, right? The fantasy draft guide?
It's projecting right now to be out around July 4th. I'm hoping to beat that time frame, but July 4th is when I believe that my draft guide, the 15th edition of my draft guide, should be out about then. I'm adding some new things this year. I'm adding some run blocking grades. I've got a number of other elements that I do every year, where I do color grading for players, so you can look at a chart and tell at a glance. Like I've got, for grading players, I've got a color grading system where blue-rated players are elite, game-changing style players. Think Ezekiel Elliott, think Aaron Rodgers, guys like that. You only probably have about 10 or 12 of those in a year. You get blue-rated players as your top players. You get green-rated players as your regular starters, guys who are going to be good to place into your starting lineup every week. You get yellow-rated players, good backup players. You really don't want them in your starting lineup, but you definitely want them on your bench if you can get them. And you have red-rated players you should avoid altogether. So you can take a glance at the charts and tell, based on the color coding, where a player is going to be ranked. And I also do a system called upside, downside, overall, which is where you can look at a player and say, okay, some players might have more upside potential than another. So if you're trying to draft for a guy you think is going to be could be a home run hitter, the system will tell you based on a 0 to 100 grade what the upside is for each particular player. So you can see their grades and say, okay, player might be green rated in overall, but it might be blue rated in upside and maybe green rated in downside. So you can get an idea there and say, okay, that guy might be somebody who I might be able to get later in the draft, but if it all pans out, he could give me elite production.
Now, what about once and the guide is just more? It's the type of material that a fantasy owner will need in order to put his rankings together, so he can prepare for the draft.
Yes, it has. I do rankings, and like I said, I do a 0 to 100 scale, and have those rankings in there. My guide tends to work best for people who are going to. I mean, mind you can use it as I've got a top 256, which grades all the players and ranks the positions against each other. So in other words, you don't just look at wide receivers and see where they rank. The top 256 will tell you where players rank,
overall,
and put certain grades, put in certain weights that quarterbacks have. Quarterbacks tend to have less value than other positions because there's so many good quarterbacks. So it tends to pull down their overall value. But it has it for that. And then, but this guide tends to work best for people who really want to get prepared for a draft and really want to, dive deep down into a draft. So a lot of people who I get getting my draft guide are people who want to do their own research, plug in some of my grades with their own system, with their own grades, to go in and dominate a league that way. That tends to be a lot of the fantasy owners who buy my guide.
Now, how about when, let's say you've got all your information, you've got all your analysis, you've bought your guide, you've prepared now for weeks, months, and you're sitting there and you're getting ready, say the week before the draft. Do you, as another aid, how important do you think it is to have an updated general, like you go to these sites, ESPN might have it, I don't know, that will show you where guys are getting drafted? How important is that to use when you're doing your draft and to have that with you, so you can say to yourself, you know what, the average national league, this receiver is being drafted in the second round or the third round, and I've got to pick, right about now. You know what? I think I could wait because he should be available.
I'll give you an example. We just I went up to Bristol right after the NFL draft, Bristol, Connecticut, the home of ESPN, and we had our ESPN Fantasy Ranking Summit. They bring all of our fantasy football analysts up there.
Okay.
We take literally it's 2.5 days worth of grading all the players. We all sit in a big round table. We have NFL Nation reporters up there. It's a really interesting process. A lot of video you can find on that on ESPN Plus. And one of the things we did is a mock draft, and we all know from having drafted against each other before, we all know Eric Carabell is one of our analysts. We know Eric Carabell is going to wait forever to draft a quarterback. You don't have to worry about Eric drafting a quarterback in round 3, round 4. Nope, he'll wait until the next to the last round.
Wow.
I think he got Kirk Cousins this year, too, if I remember correctly. He's still got a good quarterback that late. So I say that because it's important to know the room you're going against to say, okay, well, I know this person's going to do this, or I know that person's going to do this. And if you know, because if the national rankings say that this player should be taken here, then it's good to know in your room. Like in this particular draft, I drafted Rodgers in round 4 because I figured I wanted to. I mentioned blue-rated players. He's going to want blue-rated players, so I would try and get, if I can, 2 or 3 blue-rated players, because it's usually only about 12 in a season. So if you can get 2 or 3 and you can find a way to do that, you have to start the run early. But if you can get 2 or 3 of them, you're going to do pretty well. So I drafted Rodgers early. So that was my strategy to get a blue-rated player. Like I said, whereas other people are going to be waiting. So if you know where the room is, you can know, okay, well maybe I need to. This is where I can value my quarterbacks. This is where I can value my running backs. But if you go in a room and you know somebody's a Packers fan, Rodgers might go in round 1 to that person if they're that fired up to get a Packers player.
To you, it's more important, as long as you do know the room, it's more important to get your research of previous drafts of what this guy has done before, or what they've all done before, and that's more important than the national rankings. But then what if you go into a draft where you don't know who you're dealing with? Then do you rely on the national rankings and you use that? How would you incorporate that into a room you don't know the people?
You do want to know the rankings, and you also want to be aware. The national rankings would be if I'm going into a draft of that nature, then the national rankings are definitely what you want to see, because you can see the state of the industry, or go into for ESPN. They've got where players have been drafted and
yes.
where they are
what
positionally
yep.
and overall. Yeah, where they be. And when you're also wanting to, if you're looking at that, but you're also wanting to see, you can start to see when the run starts on players. Like when I drafted Rodgers, Brady went like right after that, and then we had a run, and then suddenly Deshaun Watson gets drafted. In fact, I know because Andre Snellings was one of our analysts. He was sitting right next to me, and after I made that pick, he's like, "All right, I'm taking Watson next." He figured the run on quarterbacks was starting, so you kind of have to watch that, because as soon as one player, if tight end, if people are waiting on tight end,
yep.
and they wait, but you also have to look and say, okay, well, like I said, round 4, I thought about maybe swinging Rodgers to 5, and I remember Matthew Berry said in that draft, our top analyst, he said that he was going to have drafted Rodgers. He thought about, in fact, I think he was going to draft him right before I did or right after I did. He was, he had it in his mind that maybe he wanted to go for Rodgers at that point, because we're reaching a point to where running back and wide receivers their values are becoming a bit more diluted. So, but that's the thing. I suggest being at the front end of those things if you think those players are that good. But if they're not, you got to pay attention to that, because as soon as one of those players goes, you're going to start seeing a run.
Well, I wonder, does it make it hard for you because you talk about being in the room and knowing the room? I mean, if these guys are smart, then they're going to know you, aren't they? They're going to go,
yes.
I know his guide. I know what he's thinking.
I hate it. I have a draft league with. I used to do a chat on ESPN.com, and so there's a bunch of chatters in there. All of them buy my draft guide, so they all And I go into that room, and so I'll have like these players. Like I'm really high on this player, and everybody in the room knows exactly. And I don't know who they're high on necessarily.
Yep.
I might know them from past experience, but
sure.
I don't know. Sort of like, oh yeah, Casey, you think Evan Ingram's big this year? I'm like, yeah, come on. It's unfair because they all know something about me that I don't know about them.
Yep, but at least you're making a living doing it.
Yeah.
So there's that.
I still do well in that league,
nice
and then you got bragger rights like, you guys even know who I'm picking, and I still beat you.
There you go. I like that one. And of course, once the season begins, then everything's kind of off the board, because you got trades and weekly transactions and such. And when you're in most of your leagues, because one of the things that I like to do a lot, I don't like being in leagues where you go like the whole season and nobody makes a deal. I just don't like that. That's not fun for me. I'd like it to be, and I understand, especially if you're in a league that people don't really know each other, that's going to happen more. But you would hope that if you're in a league with guys that you've been around with for several years, that you should be able to pull off a few trades during the year. What about you? What is your experience on how often you should, or whether or not even you believe that's something that is important to you to have fun?
It depends on the. I like to do trades, sort of. I'm more of a guy who can. In most leagues, I can rebuild teams during the season if I get injured. First off, I tend to go for, a lot of those green-rated players are high-rated rated players who are on the borderline between yellow and green ratings. And so my teams tend to have depth going into a season, so I can usually absorb some injuries. But if you're smart on the waiver wire and you know who to pick up and things, or if you're planning ahead, if you're thinking, okay, well, I need to get a defense, and you don't just wait until that week when everybody's looking for a defense. You go
True.
2 weeks ahead and go, okay, well, hey, it's week 5. I know I've got a bye coming up in week 7 for my defense. I need to go pick up a defense
early.
in week 7. Yeah,
Yep.
Go ahead and get them a week early and
Yep.
sacrifice a spot if you can.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do that sort of thing. And again, even in the leagues I'm in, I'm in leagues where I'm in one league where we've got it's IDP, and it's we've got the volume of players. I think we all had like 35 players on our team. It's just an incredible amount of
35 players.
Yeah,
wow.
Because you're going IDP and things, and you got all, and it's a keeper, and you've got a limit of how long you can. It's like 3 years, and it's salary cap. I mean,
oh yes, I would love to get into one of those. I have yet to get into a keeper league. That's what I would like to do.
Yep,
that's a lot of fun. It sounds like a lot of fun. I should say.
It's really deeply involved, but then you have owners in that league. We do a lot of trades in that league, but there are owners in that league they're thinking long term. So they're not thinking. So if they see you need a quarterback this week, they'll go trade you and say, okay, I'm going to trade you this quarterback. But mind you, they'll give up a good quarterback, but they know I'm going to get some value from you. Hey, I want that prospect on your bench. In fact, I made a mistake this past year. I'll even admit an error. I had made a trade to somebody else, and he gave me Tyler Eifert for a tight end, and I was going to get one other person off his roster, and he had Juju Smith-Schuster, and instead I picked the Giants running back who I thought was going to do well that week, and I just didn't have faith in Juju at that time, and he broke out like 3 weeks later. I'm still kicking myself to this day.
That all happens. That always happens, especially in the keeper league. So that's a big difference. Yeah, you can kick yourself just a little bit in a regular league, but in a keeper league, that hurts a little bit more.
But he was going forward, trying to get. I traded for Eifert, but he gave me Eifert for a low price because Eifert was hurt. So I'm thinking, okay, well maybe Eifert comes back next year. Maybe he's going to be good. I mean, he's injured, but I was getting a good price. It was like I was injured. Trading a decent. I had depth at tight end too, so I traded a decent tight end to get Eifert for possible future value.
Sure.
And then I got the prospect to be named later, and that so. But that's the thing. They're looking for that sort of thing to say, here's value for in a keeper league.
That's right.
I'm going to give you value today, and I'm going to try and get value in the future.
Well, before I let you go, Casey, what about, since you have your own grades and analysis, how does it differ? I'm sure you get this question because I've known I've known Neil Hornsby and Pro Football Focus for a long time. Matter of fact, I knew Neil in the early stages, same thing, because he was getting started right around when I was, right around when you were. And matter of fact, we did shows for several years. It was an exclusive show for Pro Football Focus, so I really know these guys. I value their work. What's the difference with what you do and what they do?
There are certain. I always like to look at it from an objective and a subjective perspective. From an objective perspective, generally speaking, if you're grading, that's why if you're grading, okay, how far downfield? I mean, like some people call it air yards, some people call it average depth of target. There's a number, but you're looking basically at how far downfield was a player when a pass was thrown his way.
Okay.
You're grading that. That's an objective metric. That's something that he got targeted. It was this for downfield. Even with somebody in coverage, there's different ways you can measure coverage because there's so many different types of coverage, off coverage, press coverage. Yep. So you can those are objective things, and
That's
the objective things, if everybody's grading them, you can basically get them from a lot of different sources. I still grade all my tape from. I do everything. Do all my own grade taping. I don't look at other charts for even the objective stuff.
Okay.
The objective stuff we all can basically agree on. It's the subjective stuff that makes all the difference. So if I'm looking at a run blocking play, I might say it was this was good run blocking. Another person might say it was bad run blocking. That was good coverage. That's not good coverage. That was an error on the quarterback. Some people might say it was this. Some people might say it was that. And how the different ways you come up with grades. I put certain weights on certain categories that somebody else might say I'm going to put more weight on this category rather than that. So it's those sorts of things that are really the differentiators in how you're doing analysis.
Okay, so it's kind of similar to the point where if you're talking to somebody who's big into the sport and they really want to learn it. There's no reason in the world, nothing stopping them from saying, you know what, the smarter I can get, I'm going to go to Pro Football Focus and I'm going to go to the Football Scientist, and I'm just going to soak it all in, and I'm going to get both opinions, and maybe even over time, if you look at those opinions, which I always think it's important, you can then judge how those opinions overall are how did they do? What was their performance themselves as an analyst over time? Because I think that's also something that fans sometimes don't do enough of. I think they tend to be too open to the analyst, the writer. Whatever they say must be true, must be right. And I think that it's always a great idea to be open-minded about it and put somebody on the spot and say, hey, if they think this guy is going to do well and another group thinks that they're going to do well, see how accurate they are over time, not just over a few months or even one season. But then again, it's also a matter of, I guess, if somebody is limited, then that's where you have competition. Oh, I only have time for, well, they got to choose, and of course you're hoping they choose you.
Yep. The Fantasy Sports Trade Association did an analysis a few years ago, and they looked at how much the average fantasy sports in team manager, what do you want to call them, a manager, coach, how much they spend on how much time, how many different companies they use. And I think they said that the average fantasy coach spends, I think it was like $110 or something on. We're talking, in-depth coaches and things. How much they actually spend on things, and they're going to spend that much on services.
Okay.
So or magazines.
Okay.
So they're going to go buy a magazine. They're going to buy another magazine, and then they might subscribe to ESPN's Insider section. Might subscribe to my service.
There you go.
Subscribe to PFF. They're going to subscribe to multiple ones. I have people who have been subscribing to my service for years, and they say I use your service, and sometimes I've had people say I use your service for the passing game, I use this one for the running game. I've had people say the other way around, or people just compare it all the way around. But
there you go.
People will put together their own system, so they might say, okay, well, Casey's got this grade here, PFF's got this grade here, Insider's got this grade, and they'll grade them like that, or they've got a variety of ways of putting it together. But the good thing about if you do it that way is I can grade for what I think how a player's going to do overall. But if you've got a league that's going to have a certain value on certain things, if you've got a league that's going to value things a certain way, like a big players and things,
sure,
you may say, okay, well, I'm going to apply my grades this way, and you can customize it to your own system. And I've got a lot of people who do that, who say, hey, I know how to take what you give me and apply it to my particular league. So that's knowing your league is one of the most important things.
All right, Casey, looking forward to talking to you a lot more as we get closer to the start of the season. Before I let you go, though, tell us about the draft guide again, how we can purchase it, where to go, and so forth.
The draft guide can be purchased at thefootballscientist.com. I also post discount codes on Facebook and Twitter. My Facebook feed is at Casey Joyner TFS. It's TFS like the football scientist, and same with Twitter at Casey Joyner TFS. And I'll be sending out more updates as the season gets closer and things, but it's going to be out in around July 4th. About 400 pages, 40,000 words, a ton of analysis, a ton of metrics. And if you go to thefootballscientist.com, you get an overview of all the different things that the guide has, because it's a growing entity, and every year I add more to it.
Awesome. Casey, I appreciate it. It was great talking to you again. I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Sounds great. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Casey. That's Casey Joyner, again, the football scientist, and it's going to be a great fantasy season here on the Our Football Radio Network. We promise you that. We promised you last season it was going to be, and already it's off to a great start before it even begins. So once again, thanks to Casey Joyner for coming in here and educating us, and we look forward to having him on many more times the rest of the season. Thanks for tuning into today's show. We'll be back soon for more in-depth NFL and college football coverage, including previews for the 2018 season starting in July. Don't forget to order a subscription of your choosing on the Our-Lads website at ourlads.com. You can log on to the website, hit the subscribe menu on the top left, and go to the homepage there, fill out the form, place your order, you're all set. So that'll wrap it up here for the Our-Lads Football Radio Network on this Friday, the 1st of June, 2018. We'll see you next time.